Simply Financial with Christopher Calandra, Certified Financial Planner, is an innovative, comprehensive, informative, and cutting-edge podcast that discusses financial topics ranging from personal finance, economics, politics, and personal growth. Simply Financial will cover intriguing and thought-provoking questions so that the listener can simply increase their financial IQ.
Welcome to the Simply Financial podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. Today's episode is season number 3, episode 7.
On today's episode, I wanted to cover what I believe is an interesting topic. I want to get some thoughts from my guest, attorney Shawn Yesner, on bankruptcy laws, why it is a healthy part of a capitalist economy, and I want to explore that a little bit today. I think it's a little bit off topic from what I will typically do, because so much of what we focus on the Simply Financial podcast is more about the achievement of financial goals. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're somebody that is trying to obtain wealth and live a good life, sometimes bad things happen. It could be business mistakes. It could be things outside of your control, like lawsuits or a bad health outcome. So I think this is a very important topic, and I'm thrilled to have as a guest attorney Shawn Yesner. He is in the Tampa, Florida area. I think actually his office is in Clearwater. He has his own podcast called Crushing Debt. His practice focuses on bankruptcy, work with clients, as well as work with landlords and real estate transactions. So Shawn, first off, thanks for taking time out of your busy day to talk with me about this topic.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be on your show.
So to kind of kick it off, hopefully I gave a good primer. So as an attorney, you've been practicing for some time, I believe. How did you decide to make a part of your practice a focus on working with individuals considering or going into bankruptcy? How did that happen?
So it's an interesting story. I graduated with an undergrad degree in accounting, and so the first thing I wanted to do when I got into law school, I said, I'm going to be a tax attorney. And then as I went through law school, I got the litigation bug, and I said, I'm going to be in court and I'm going to argue. And then I got out of bankruptcy, and the first job I had right out of law school was doing real estate and immigration law. And that was what my boss did, the guy that hired me. That's what he did. I instantly fell in love with the real estate side of the practice, and I really did not enjoy the immigration side of the practice. It just wasn't to my liking. I didn't really take a shine to it. So a couple of years later, I decided I wanted to leave that firm and go. I was working for a solo practitioner, so I wanted to work for a bigger law firm, and I ended up moving to Clearwater. I was in Miami, and I ended up moving to Clearwater to take a job at what we now call a foreclosure mill. And so I was taking houses away from people. I was representing lenders in foreclosure. And that's what really gave me my first exposure to bankruptcy law. Was in the foreclosure process, someone would file bankruptcy, and then I would have to go into bankruptcy court on behalf of the lender and represent the lender in whatever Chapter 7, Chapter 13 case, Chapter 11 case, whatever it happened to be. About 4 years after I moved to Clearwater, the owner of the law firm said, I'm shutting the law firm down. She didn't want to do foreclosure law anymore. So that firm continued to operate, but do intellectual property law, so patent and trademarks and copyrights. And
it's completely different.
Yeah, that's what the owner did. Everybody else did the foreclosure stuff. The owner of the firm did all the intellectual property, and that's all she wanted to do. So I think a majority of the attorneys at that firm moved laterally to other foreclosure law firms, still representing banks to this day. Some of them still represent banks. This was in 2004. And I decided, I always knew I wanted to be my own boss. I always knew I wanted to own my own law firm. And so I said, well, no big banks are going to hire me. Chase isn't going to hire me. Freddie Mac's not going to hire me. So let me see if I can switch sides, hang a shingle, defend people in foreclosure. I know how to do them really quick. Let me see if I can slow them down and help some people. And you really can't do foreclosure defense law without understanding how bankruptcy works. And so that transitioned into representing borrowers in bankruptcy court. And then that, Chapter 7s and 13s and 11s, which we can talk about, I can explain in a little bit more detail. But that's how I I transitioned. What I learned about myself in terms of, like you said, I've been practicing now, as we record this, I've been practicing for 20 years. I got my license in 98. And so what I learned is I hate to see people being bullied. And so if we met at a networking event and you asked me for my elevator pitch, so to speak, I would tell you that I help eliminate the financial bullies in your life. In fact, that's what the Crushing Debt podcast is all about. I also wrote a book also called Crushing Debt, and it's 9 strategies to eliminate financial bullies. And so when I see people being bullied by creditors, that's what hits my hot button, and that's what causes me to help them out of that situation, help the borrowers out of that situation, help lift that burden off of their shoulders when they're being literally crushed by their debt load.
So this is just a spur-of-the-moment thing, but a very, very good friend of mine, Brian, is an attorney, and I think similar to you, he's involved in a few practice areas in Connecticut, but recently his practice has become much more focused on defense, criminal defense. And of course, then that means that he's interacting with some people that might be considered bad apples. That's a nice way to put it. I don't know.
Right.
It's a family show, maybe. So, and then as a non-attorney, it's hard for me to appreciate how this good man, a good family man, is doing something that I wouldn't feel comfortable with personally. And so now that you described what you did, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, do you feel like now you're on the right team, whereas reflecting in your past, you were not on the right team, at least for you, when you were representing the banks?
It's an interesting question. And so one of the things that I've really taken a look at, and one of the reasons that I came up with bullying is looking at myself and looking at how I grew up and looking what happened in my life. And bullies, and one particular bully, played a big part in who I am and what I became. And so that theme, I found, wove its way through almost everything that I did. The way that I'll answer your question, I also still represent creditors. So I still represent landlords. I still represent private individuals that may have loaned money. I still represent people that want to foreclose on property if, for example, they sold it and they took back seller financing, so the buyer's going to sign the
note. So they're holding the mortgage.
Right. I've foreclosed on behalf of those people. I've got a handful of those pending. And in that sense, I still think that bullying theme continues, because while I'm not representing, the big banks, the Chases and the Bank of Americas and the Wells Fargos, and I'm not representing those guys anymore. I'm representing an individual who owns a note and mortgage, and that person relies on the income stream from the homeowner in order for him to pay his bills. So it is a form of bullying in my mind for the homeowner not to pay that private lender. And so in that sense, I think I'm still keeping with the theme of what the firm does. And so I don't know that there really is any right side or wrong side. I joke about it with friends of mine in the industry that, I've switched sides, or I'm on the dark side, or I'm on the good side, or whatever. But it's really all comes down to, can I help the client come to a resolution? Can I defend the foreclosure? Can I file the bankruptcy? Can I file a debt harassment lawsuit? Can I do something that gets my client to the end result that they want?
All right, that's a great answer. I don't know if it was a great question. I kind of stumbled in the build-up to it.
No, I get it.
But it was a good explanation. So one of the questions I had, and you referred to this before, maybe you could educate me and my listeners. There's different types of bankruptcy, right, for individuals. There's different chapters. Right. You mentioned a few of them. There's Chapter 7, Chapter 13, I think. Can you walk through the major types and give us just a thumbnail sketch of each one?
Sure. So Chapter 7 is what we call liquidation. So every state is going to have its exemption rules, and the exemptions say what can or cannot be protected. So, for example, in Florida, homestead is 100% protected. If you have your primary residence free and clear, creditors can't touch it. There's different exemptions for cars, for example. So the way that I describe it, maybe that Florida has a $1,000 exemption for a car. So if you own a car that has no debt on it, free and clear, and that car is worth $4,000, you get a $1,000 exemption, which means that car has $3,000 of equity that is not exempt. In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy case, a liquidation bankruptcy case, the trustee is going to say, give me $3,000 or give me the car. And that's it. And the trustee is going to take that $3,000 and use that to pay your creditors. And so if you have $30,000 of debt, they're going to get paid 10% of what they're owed, and they go away. The trick to a Chapter 7 is that we need to have assets that are entirely exempt, or we need to have assets that are so low in value there's no interest there for the trustee. And so if we do that, that's when you can file a Chapter 7 case and not pay back any of your creditors, wipe the slate clean, get that fresh start, and keep moving. There is an income element. So when the Bankruptcy Code was amended in 2005, they put an element in there of income. So we have to prove income to the bankruptcy trustee. We have to prove that the debtor's income level is low enough to qualify for Chapter 7. And that also varies by state, and it varies by household size. So, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but for example, a family of 4 in Florida, I think, is around $74,000 or $75,000 of gross annual revenue. If you're below that, you can file a Chapter 7. But for a family of 3 in Connecticut, might be different. I don't know. You can look it up on the United States Trustees website, what each state and each level is.
Understood.
So that's a Chapter 7. First, you have to qualify based on income. Second, you have to qualify based on having either assets that are exempt, or to the extent those assets are not exempt, you just have to have the ability to pay the trustee. Now, in my example, where there was $3,000, at least here in Tampa, a lot of the trustees will allow you to pay that in installments, not very many installments. So maybe the trustee says, okay, look, I'll take it over 6 months. So you pay me $500 a month for 6 months. There's your $3,000, and we're done. And so that's how the Chapter 7 works. Or maybe you can borrow it from mom and dad, or borrow it from sister, brother, or whoever will let you borrow that money. But that's a Chapter 7. First, we got to qualify based on the income level. Then we have to make sure that either our assets are all exempt, protected, or we have to make sure that we have the ability to pay the trustee. A Chapter 13 is what we call a reorganization plan. It's a payment plan to the trustee. So same example. The Bankruptcy Code says that a Chapter 13 cannot be longer than 60 months, 60 months, which is 5 years. So in my exact same example, we have that car that's got $3,000 of equity that is not exempt. We've got $30,000 in creditors, so we're going to pay them 10% of what's owed. But in this case, we pay the $3,000 over the 60-month bankruptcy plan. So is that $50 a month, if my math is correct? You pay the bankruptcy trustee a stream of payments. The trustee takes those payments, pays out to your creditors, and at the end of the 5 years, you get your discharge. Your bankruptcy's over. So typically, Chapter 13 is either where your income is to the point that you do not qualify for Chapter 7. It's above that median income, and so you don't qualify for Chapter 7. You have disposable income at the end of the month, or it's for a situation where the value of your assets is so high that you cannot afford to pay it back into Chapter 7, so we pay it back over time in a Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is also good for people that find themselves in foreclosure. We can use the Chapter 13 to eliminate second mortgages that are totally underwater. We can use Chapter 13 to catch up mortgages that have a deficit. We can use Chapter 13 to modify mortgages. We can use Chapter 13 in IRS situations, potentially when the IRS debt is not dischargeable. We can pay it back over the life of the Chapter 13 plan. So the Chapter 13 is a payment plan bankruptcy that gives us a level of flexibility to have a little bit more control over how we're paying back the creditors. The only other one that could apply to individuals is a Chapter 11. Most people think of Chapter 11s as business bankruptcies, and they mostly are.
Yeah, that's what I think of with Chapter 11.
Right. However, I've got a client right now that is in an individual Chapter 11. So the problem with this particular client, his income is very high, and so he doesn't qualify for Chapter 7. His debt is very high, so he made some investments and guaranteed some businesses that those businesses have now failed, and based on the personal guarantees within those businesses, his debt is in the tens of millions of dollars. Chapter 13 has a limit. and I don't recall off the top of my head, but the limit is right around $300,000 or $400,000 of unsecured debt, like credit cards and hospital bills and IRS and that kind of stuff. And I want to say it's around 1.1 million of secured debt, so houses and cars and that kind of stuff. Well, he's got tens of millions of unsecured debt, so he's way above the threshold for a Chapter 13. He makes too much income for a Chapter 7. So in that scenario, the Bankruptcy Code does allow us to file a Chapter 11 for an individual. But for your listeners out there, it's rare, and Chapter 11s are expensive and they're complicated. So if anyone says, yeah, Chapter 11 is just a really complicated Chapter 13, run the other direction. They don't quite know what they're talking about. Chapter 11s are a lot more complex.
So Shawn, in Chapter 13, can you exclude certain debts and or assets and not make them part of the bankruptcy? In other words, using your previous example, if I had a car that was worth $4,000, but I had other debts that were problematic, could I put the other debts in my Chapter 13 reorganization and payment plan and exclude, let's say, that car, including if I had a loan on that car?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, but I'm going to get there in a different way. So, let's assume in my example you got the $4,000 car and it's got $5,000 in debt on it, so the car's upside down. In a bankruptcy, you have to list everything you own and everybody you owe money to. We have to be an open book to the bankruptcy court and the bankruptcy trustee. Now, what we can do after that is within the Chapter 13, we can say, we're going to continue to make our car payments. And so a lot of people will say we haven't filed on the car or we've pulled the car out of the bankruptcy. And that's a slang way to say it. And if it makes it more understandable, I'm okay with that. But technically, we have to list the car, and then we have to tell the trustee we're going to continue to pay for and keep the car. And that concept applies in Chapter 7 or Chapter 13.
Okay, so that Main Street terminology is not exactly accurate because it's going to be included, but you can designate it that, hey, listen, I'm still going to pay on it. I don't want to do a reorg or change the payment plan, but it has to be included because you have to disclose all of your assets and debts. You can't just cherry pick what you want to include. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And then within the different classes, so we cannot do that with an unsecured debt. In other words, you can't say, I want to put Visa in my bankruptcy, but I want to leave MasterCard out. We can't do that. But when we're talking about a car or a house or a secured debt like that, we can do stuff like that.
All right. So who should consider filing bankruptcy? You already touched on this a little bit with whether you ought to consider 7 verse 11 verse 13, but who should consider filing bankruptcy?
So I think there's two different types of people. The way that I get asked this question a lot is, do I have enough debt to file bankruptcy? And I think that's subjective. And so the way that I've always answered that is, if you have $30,000 of debt and you make $40,000 a year, then yeah, if you have more debt than you can afford to repay, then yeah, you should probably consider filing a bankruptcy. But if you have $30,000 in debt and you make $300,000 a year, you can probably afford to pay that $30,000 back fairly quickly based on your income. I mean, even for the Chapter 11 example that I brought up earlier, he makes, I believe, over 6 figures a year, in the low 6 figures, 200,000, 300,000, something in that range. But he's got like $15 million in debt.
Oh my God! And that makes my skin crawl, Shawn. You're making me very uncomfortable. You keep going back to that. It freaks me out.
But he guaranteed a whole bunch of leases on properties. But the issue there is
so just to catch the listeners up, he must have had business debt, borrowed money through the business, but the business couldn't get the loan by itself, so he had to supply a personal guarantee, and then the business must have imploded, had bad results, and so the business couldn't pay back the loan, and the creditors now are trying to use the personal guarantee as a way to get repaid, and he can't possibly repay, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, you just need to have more debt than you can afford to repay, and that's different for everybody else. You make 6 figures, 10 grand in debt ain't such a big deal. You make, $35,000, $45,000, 10 grand in debt is a big deal. And then the other thing that I look at when I'm consulting with a bankruptcy client is, what is your situation? So at least here in Florida, we've got a wage garnishment exemption for the head of household. And the head of household is the person that provides more than 50% of the support to dependents. So you think about a mom and dad with 2 kids and mom doesn't work. Well, dad's wages would be exempt from garnishment because he provides 100% of the support to the wife and kids. Or you think about a single mom with minor kids or a single dad with minor kids. Those people would be exempt from a wage garnishment. So even that person that has $30,000 in debt that makes $40,000 or $50,000 a year that can't afford to repay it, well, if their wages are exempt from garnishment and they have a thick skin, then just tell the creditors, I'm sorry, I can't pay you. The creditors really won't. You're judgment proof in essence. The creditors really can't take what you don't have. And so it's rare that I give someone that advice, but I've always tried to qualify myself as somebody that even though I practice bankruptcy, even though I file a lot of bankruptcies, I'm not always going to try to put that square peg in the round hole. Bankruptcy may not be the best option for everybody. And so that's typically those are the types of people, they're being chased by the IRS. They've got debts that they can't afford to repay. Maybe their wages are subject to garnishment because husband and wife work. All those are indicators that bankruptcy may be a good option.
All right, so that's great. So walk me through, as a consumer, if one of our listeners out there unfortunately has some significant financial pressures such that they're considering bankruptcy, something they want to explore, how do you go about choosing an attorney to counsel you and maybe help you enter into bankruptcy? What are some of the keys in picking an attorney?
Well, clearly you want one that has his own podcast about eliminating debt. I mean, that would be number one, right?
Obviously. Yes. That's
Shane,
good. And that's Shawn
softball.
Yesner from Tampa, Florida, with an office in Clearwater, Florida.
There you go. You throw me a softball, I got to take a swing, right? I would, for me, it's people have said you want to focus on experience. Well, okay, now I've got the experience. I've been practicing for a long time, but back when I was young, I didn't have the experience. So I don't put too much weight in experience. Certainly experience and length of practice and number of cases filed and all that stuff could be relevant. I typically go to more, do you connect with that attorney? Do you understand what they're trying to say? Do you like the plan? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily pick somebody that all they do is file bankruptcy because, like I said, bankruptcy is not going to be the answer in every situation. So is the attorney that you're talking to, do they have other practice areas? Do they know other ways to eliminate debt, or is every case a bankruptcy and they're going to try to shove that square peg into the round hole? Talk to them about prices and how they get paid and do they have maybe a very active blog? Do they have an active website? Do they have a YouTube page? Do they podcast? What kind of information are they putting out there on social media? Do they lecture for the local bar association or other professional organizations? Do they provide continuing education to other attorneys or CPAs or financial advisors or whoever? But I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to, do you feel comfortable with the person?
And it's a great answer, and that actually answer could be applicable not just with somebody to help you with bankruptcy, but any attorney and actually pretty much any professional relationship, whether it's a financial planner like I am. I think it would be a good answer if you were looking for a CPA or a real estate agent. I think it's a very good answer because your point is very well taken. We all point to experience. It's almost like a quick shortcut, but at my age now and my experience, having been around the block a few times at age 48, I want to value experience, but I want to deal with people that I have shared values with, that I feel I have a good trust bond with. And also, and I said this to a mutual friend of ours yesterday, in fact, that I also want to have part of my team, people that are helping me in my business and personal life, is that they're good teachers, so that if I was sitting with with you or, God forbid, a different bankruptcy attorney, that they would also teach me, that they would lay out a plan and not just tell me what they know, but also teach me enough so that I would be empowered to make good decisions. I don't necessarily need to be immersed in the law or tax accounting or anything like that, but I want to be taught so I could feel good about making decisions. And I think your description was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that I've done a good consultation when the client gets up and says, thank you, I can sleep tonight, or thank you, I feel like the weight's been lifted off my shoulders. If they start to say stuff like that, I feel good about the way the consultation went. And typically when they say stuff like that, they end up hiring me.
There you go. And it's the same in my field. If I get that feedback, it's a very good sign that I'm going to have a new client, and we have a very good chance at building a successful long-term business relationship. Kind of a philosophical question. Hopefully you could humor me a bit, Shawn, is, and I'll set it up this way, it seems today with the media and just all the goings on in today's modern society, where you have 24/7 cable and social media, things are much more transparent and an open book. And some people might look at filing bankruptcy as a bad thing for society, that you're letting somebody get out of their debt, that you borrowed the money, you should have to repay the money. You took the mortgage, you should have to repay the mortgage. You had a business and you borrowed money for equipment. That business failed, and now you're getting out of it. And some people, I think, view that as bad for society, that why would you let somebody do that? They ought to be punished or made to pay. But it seems to me that there are very beneficial reasons on why you want to have bankruptcy laws like we have in a dynamic capitalist economy like we have here in America. So can you touch on some of the beneficial reasons why this is good for society as a whole, that your clients can file bankruptcy when they're in financial need of relief?
Yeah, so two things. First, I'm going to plug. So my podcast, as we record this, I'm at episode 152, I think, comes out here shortly. But back at episode 80 of the Crushing Debt podcast, I did an interview with an attorney buddy of mine. So I get these questions a lot, am I going to go to jail if I don't pay back my debt? And there is no such thing as debtor prison. We eliminated debtor's prison when the colonists came over. But I had a friend of mine who is a history buff. He's another attorney, but he's a history buff. And so I was talking to him one day and said, why don't you research the history of debtor's prison and let's do a show about it? And that became episode 80 of the podcast. So if anybody is interested in a history lesson about what debtor's prison is and how and why we got rid of it when the colonists came over, I would say go to episode 80 of my show, and that's the interview that I had with my friend who goes into all of that. And one of the things that we touch on in there is, one of the reasons that we got rid of debtor's prison is, in a capitalist economy, we want people to have the ability to take chances without the fear of failure. In other words, take chances and borrow money to try to invent that product, take chances to try to get that business up and off the ground, knowing that if you fail, there is the safety net of a bankruptcy to eliminate your debt. The other way that I would answer that question is, sometimes bad stuff happens to good people. I mean, when you incur a debt, when you start a business, most of my clients, I would say almost all of my clients, really do intend to pay it back and want to pay it back. And it's a big moral issue for a lot of them. But what I typically say to them is, Visa isn't going to go out of business because you didn't pay them back their $10,000 or however much Visa's going to be just fine. But it's that concept that everybody deserves a second bite at the apple. It's the concept that sometimes bad stuff happens to good people. It's the concept of, when I borrowed this money, I didn't intend to get sick. I didn't intend to lose my job. I didn't intend to get a divorce. I didn't intend for my husband, who was the primary wage earner, to pass away, or my wife, who was the primary wage earner, to pass away. I didn't intend for any of these bad things to happen. When we were in the foreclosure meltdown, and Florida was one of the epicenters of the foreclosure meltdown a couple of years ago, people were saying we need to stop foreclosures. And I kept saying that's the wrong attitude, because you're not going to stop foreclosures until you stop divorces. You're not going to stop foreclosures until you stop people from getting divorced. You're not going to stop foreclosures until you stop people from dying. And because those things are never going to stop, you're never going to stop foreclosures. And I think by the same token, you're never going to stop bankruptcies, at least here in the U.S., and it gives people that safety net. It gives them the second bite at the apple. For the people that say, I want to pay my debt back, I just refunded a lady the majority of her money. She retained me in 2016 to file a bankruptcy, but over the next 2 years got back on her feet, paid down her debt, got better jobs, got side income, got investment income, got all this other stuff. Now she doesn't need to file bankruptcy. So I refunded her a majority of her retainer. My retainer letters say if I do work on your file, I get to keep a little bit of it. But, great. You don't have to file bankruptcy. That's fantastic.
Right.
Here's your money back. Great. You don't have to file. But because we're never going to stop those other things from happening, I don't think we're ever going to stop bankruptcies. It's there for people that need that clean slate and that second chance.
No, I think that's very well said, and I'm sure you see and there exist abuses of the bankruptcy laws. Anytime you have a rule, you'll find people that are going to take advantage of the rule and break the spirit of what is intended. But I think in the vast majority of instances, we don't want people in this country to have a setback and have to have that stick with them for the rest of their lives. You want people to be able to reset, have a fresh start. And candidly, Shawn, I think you would agree we're from the same generation. This is in America's DNA, is to root for the underdog, to root for somebody that was down and comes back. I mean, how many movies have we seen in sports that are based on that cliche? But it's a powerful one. And I think it translates to the bankruptcy laws in a more financial sense. And you want entrepreneurs to be innovative and to take chances, because that helps create a dynamic economy that is really a benefit to all of us. So I think the people that complain too loudly about bankruptcy laws probably haven't thought through the implications of not allowing people to reset, get a second chance, a second bite of the apple, like you had said. It would do so much more harm than good. So I'm glad there's people like you out there to help folks get themselves some help, recover, and hopefully lead productive lives after filing bankruptcy.
Yeah, and I also do draw the line. So I'm not going to file a bankruptcy for everybody. I had a potential client, and I felt really bad. He came to me to file bankruptcy, and I think it would have been his fifth or sixth bankruptcy case. I hadn't been involved in any of the previous ones, but he was asking me to file for the fifth or sixth time. And not only that, but he was asking me to file because he owned a home and the debt on the home was in someone else's name. Well, number one, a bankruptcy is not going to do anything for that type of situation. Number two, it's your fifth or sixth, and I turned him away. I can't help those type, because at the same time, I've got a reputation within the bankruptcy court. One of the reasons I wanted to stay in bankruptcy when I left the foreclosure mill, when I went off on my own, one of the reasons I wanted to stay in bankruptcy court is it's the type of bar that we would hear about in law school, where when we're in court, we are literally making the best argument we can for the client. We are at each other's throats. We are arguing to the best of our ability to the judge. But when the hearing's over, we can go out and have a beer. We can go out and have a good time. I can call that attorney and say, hey, attorney A, I'm having this issue with attorney B. What do you think? And discuss those issues. It's a very collegial bar association, the bankruptcy bar here in Tampa. And so I've got that reputation to protect as well. I don't want to be filing frivolous things. With the judges as well, I mean, I know some of the state court judges here in Pinellas and Hillsborough County, Clearwater, Tampa area, St. Petersburg area. I know a handful of the judges, and I think a handful of the judges would either recognize my name, maybe recognize me on site. Every single one of the bankruptcy judges here in Tampa would recognize me. And so I've got that reputation to protect where I don't want to file frivolous things either. Plus, you've always got the threat of sanctions. If you do file something frivolous, the bankruptcy court's going to come down on you and sanction you for that action.
And it would violate what you talked about at the beginning of the show. If you were really interested in protecting people from bullies, financial bullies, if you're representing people that are clearly gaming the system and being abusive and operating in the gray areas of the law in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, it's just probably not worth it.
Yeah, I'm becoming the bully that I want to protect people against.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, listen, our time flew by. Thank you so much. For individuals that are listening, especially I have lots of listeners as well as clients of Elliott Wealth Management Services in Florida. How could they get more information about you as well as your terrific podcast?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The easiest way is just to go to the website, which is yesnerlaw.com, YESNER law.com. All of my blogs are there. A lot of my YouTube videos are there. All of the podcasts get updated there, so you can go there. The podcast is also on all the major players. So it's on Apple Podcast, it's on Spotify, it's on Stitcher, you can get it through Alexa and Siri, and all the artificial intelligence ladies love me, so you can get it there as well. Those would be the two things I would recommend. You can go directly to the YouTube page. I'd love to get more subscribers to the YouTube page and to the podcast itself. But everything I think starts with, everything is designed to funnel back to the Yesner Law website. That's where most of the information is going to be. There's a place to contact us and all that information.
Beautiful. Well, thanks again for taking some time. I really enjoyed the subject. And if anybody's out there and they're under tremendous financial pressure and are burdened by debt, please know there's options out there. There's help. If you're in Florida, the Yesner Law Firm is an excellent option to get some help and information, and I'm sure there are excellent attorneys if you happen not to be in Florida and need that kind of help. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Simply Financial podcast. I'll be back with you very soon on an upcoming episode. In the meantime, while you're visiting the Yesner Law Firm website and checking Shawn out, please check out my website, which is www.elliottwealth.com. You could get episodes of my podcast, the Simply Financial podcast, as well as sign up for an initial no-cost complimentary consultation, because if you're not a client of ours already, we would love to listen to what your goals and objectives are and see if we could help you win with money. Thanks again. I'll be back with you soon.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of SagePoint Financial Incorporated and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of the information provided at these websites, nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management, LLC, not affiliated with SagePoint Financial.
Simply Financial is part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can find Exvadio podcasts at exvadio.com/podcast, the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes Store, iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. So join us and stay informed and entertained.